Hello, and welcome to Purpose is Not a Slogan, our latest clear conversation in partnership with our friends at TML Partners, an international executive recruitment service specializing in senior marketing and communications appointments. My name is Geraint Jones, and I'm Claire M&C Saatchi's Global Marketing Director. It's great to see some old friends and new joining us for today's conversation, but just to remind you, as an attendee, your camera and microphone are automatically off, and you will not be able to turn them on accidentally, so you can relax. This session is being recorded and shared on our YouTube channel at Claire M&C Saatchi and on our LinkedIn page. And for more content, events, and to watch recordings of this and other conversations, visit clearstrategy.com/events, link in the comments box, or follow us at Claire M&C Saatchi on YouTube. Link also in the comments box for more updates. Should you wish to ask a question during the webinar, please use the Q&A function that you'll find in the bar at the bottom of your screen and start your question with the name of the panelist you'd like to answer if relevant. For example, type Louise, then your question if you'd like Louise to answer your question. Right, with that out of the way, let's get on with the show. So, for those of you who don't know, Clear is the growth consulting arm of the M&C Saatchi Group, and we found ourselves in the thick of helping brands to manage the chaos that the last 18 months has brought with it. From future scenario planning to rapid, agile innovation, category strategy to portfolio management, brand repositioning to proposition redevelopment, we've been asked to help brands in a number of sectors to navigate a path through the really choppy waters of marketing strategy. In amongst all of that, brand strategy in all its various forms has been pretty high on the agenda for many of our clients as they grapple with monumental change. And corporate purpose has become an increasingly high-profile part of that strategy discussion. And it's also become a lightning rod for criticism from regulators and commentators alike. It's fashionable to take pot shots at purpose, but as the FCA becomes increasingly concerned with organizations behaving with a purpose beyond profit, it's crucial that financial services brands and others understand its value, the pitfalls, and the best practices around how to use purpose. As I said, we're partnering once more with our friends at TML Partners, and Emma Morrison, Associate Director at TML, is going to talk a little bit more about them and our partnership before she hands over to Will Kingston, Clear's incoming head of financial services in the United States, who will walk through some of our thinking on purpose before we debate some of those questions raised with this brilliant panel who I'm going to introduce now. I'm delighted to welcome Richard Pash, who is UK Chief Customer Officer at Zurich Insurance. Richard joined Zurich in July 2016 as Director of UK Life Marketing. He became UK Marketing Director in 2017 and moved to his current position last year. He leads the UK Customer Office, delivering brand marketing, digital marketing, customer insight and experience, customer communication, and events, so a pretty full job. He's responsible for marketing and customer activity of each of the business divisions and across the broader UK business, and he's a member of the Global Customer Office Leadership Team and Vice President of the Institute of Customer Service. He's got broad experience in managing business units at companies like Virgin Media, Vodafone and Mars, so he brings experience from right around the branded space. We're also joined by Louise Shield, Director of Corporate Communications at Santander UK. Louise manages the reputation of the bank and leading the internal communications, media relations and public affairs team, and she has over 20 years communications experience in the public and private sectors, having previously held roles at RSA, Lloyds of London and the UK government. We're joined as well by Jakub, Senior Client Advisor and Chief Advocacy Officer for the Economics of Mutuality movement, a groundbreaking management innovation empowering companies to adopt a fair and responsible form of capitalism that performs better than today's purely financial version. Jay actually joined Mars Catalyst in 2007 and led several critical components of the Economics of Mutuality platform. And since 2014, he's directed the multi-year joint research partnership on Economics of Mutuality with Oxford University's Said Business School, where he's a regular guest lecturer on Economics of Mutuality. He's also the co-author of the EOM book, Completing Capitalism. And of course, it wouldn't be complete without introducing Will and Emma. Will is a director of the director and the US head of financial services at Clear, and he's led teams in management consultancies, unicorn startups, and listed companies across 4 continents. And before joining Clear, he was head of customer experience for Close Brothers, a FTSE 250 UK merchant bank. And prior to that, he grew a 50-strong sales and customer ops team for Zego, the UK's first insurtech unicorn, and a cross-regional team to launch Thailand's first digital bank. So a pretty varied background. And finally, Emma Morrison is an associate director who leads TML Partners' market-leading financial services practice. She's been a trusted advisor to senior marketing professionals since 2014 and specializes in recruitment of permanent and interim marketing roles. I'm now going to hand over to Emma. So Emma, why don't you explain a little bit more about TML and the partnership with Claire M&C Saatchi before we hand over to Will to start the debate?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure partnering with Clear for nearly 2 years now on a series of roundtables and webinars for both our B2B and consumer communities. We're naturally delighted to be co-hosting today. And for those of you who don't know us, at TML Partners, we're an executive search firm who specialise in those senior and board level marketing and communications appointments internationally. We're sector agnostic, but we have sort of centres of excellence across consumer, B2B technology, professional and legal services, corporate affairs, and then I lead up our financial services practice. So without further ado, let me hand over to Will, who's going to share some thoughts to set the scene for today's discussion.
Thanks, Emma. It's lovely to be joining this conversation. I've done so several times as a client of Clear, and it's now great to do so as a member of the Clear team. As the technology warms up, it feels like that this purpose debate has bubbled up over the last decade or so, but really at Clear, we see it as being an evolution of some very specific eras in corporate history. It started with the sales era, where it was all about the product. Think about the Ford Model T and the way that it changed travel. We soon realised that the product in and of itself wasn't enough. We needed to attach emotion to the product, and the brand era, the marketing era was born. It's not just about the car, it's about the car that can help you get the girl. Once again, though, we realised that the product with emotion that sits behind it wasn't enough. We needed to think about the experience we were delivering. The customer experience era of the late 90s and early 2000s came about. It wasn't just about the car, it was about how do you actually get your kids to soccer practice. And inverted commas, the soccer mum car was born. We now find ourselves on the precipice, or indeed in the midst of the purpose era. It's not just about the technology, or it's not just about the car and the wonderful technology of a Tesla. It's about its broader mission of environmental sustainability and making travel more environmentally sustainable. For the purposes of this conversation, we define purpose as your reason for being as a business above and beyond mere profit generation. Now, we think that's a very important goal, but at the same time, we think it's at risk of going off the rails into what we call the yoga babble era. Basically, think Tesla, but high. When we talk about the yoga babble era, we're not talking about your reason for being as a business. We're talking about corporate comms, virtue signaling, woke nonsense that fundamentally erodes trust with customers. And we think that it's important to delineate between the two, and it's important for us in this debate today to be talking about purpose as your fundamental reason for being as a business, and not as a cheap corporate comms tool. A few questions to get our brains in gear. The first is, do customers really care about your purpose? And the answer isn't as clear-cut as you may think. If you speak to other consultants or other of our esteemed colleagues, that their answer would be almost universally yes. If you look at McKinsey, should purpose receive more weight than profits? Absolutely. Capgemini, do companies have a larger role to play in society than just looking after your self-interests? Sure. Profit, is it important for brands to offer a relevant set of values and beliefs? On the whole, yes. Now, without wanting to bag other consulting firms, or actually, let's face it, of course I want to bag other consulting firms, they're all asking the wrong question. The fact of the matter is, inevitably in this debate, you're going to have to start thinking about trade-offs occasionally, and you're going to have to start thinking about costs occasionally. It's not as simple as just whether or not customers like that warm and fuzzy feeling that you put out in a promotional campaign. We think better questions to be asked would be things like, have you ever bought a product because you didn't agree with the company's purpose? Companies have a larger role to play in society, even if you have to play a bit extra as a consumer. And of course, is it important for a company to offer a relevant set of values and beliefs, even if you happen to disagree with them personally? We think the answers to those questions aren't nearly as clear-cut in today's society. And for what it's worth, price and quality have been the defining consumer choice characteristics since time immemorial. We don't think that's changing anytime soon. So, second question, what's wrong with purpose today? I've alluded to the yoga babble era, which we are at risk of careering into. And the yoga babble era was characterized by one company above and beyond all others, and that was WeWork. Now, the We company's former, I should state, guiding mission under Adam Newman was to elevate the world's consciousness. It wasn't good enough just to lease office space. We needed to elevate the world's consciousness. cue collective eye rolls around the corporate world. The good thing is that we are becoming more conscious of this bastardization of purpose. In fact, to the point now where we can even measure it. And the inimitable Scott Galloway has had a crack at just doing just that, where he's looked at the mission statement, which we'll use as a proxy for purpose for this exercise, and compared it to the stock performance of particular businesses 1 year post-IPO. And what you can see, unfortunately, there's a lot of companies in that bottom right corner who are completely full of shit with their purpose and are not delivering on profitability post-IPO. On the other side, you can see there are companies like Tesla, Zoom, and Google who are on the right side of this conversation. Third, and I would say most importantly, how can you actually cultivate a purpose that drives real impact? We wouldn't be consultants without an alliterative framework. So a couple of dimensions perhaps for us to think about this conversation. First is your purpose actionable, or is it abstract? Is it something which you can speak about, you can't actually drive change within your organization? And the second is it actually authentic? Does it go towards your specific raison d'etre as a business, or is it something which any old business could have spewed out? And we think that there are 4 pretty clear categories that emerge when you think about purpose in this way. First is the pretenders, and this is where you don't want to be. We would argue, and this admittedly was met with mixed responses, but we would argue that Gillette's Best a Man Can Be campaign was in this category. It was artificial in the sense that it was picking up on a social trend of the time, being the Me Too movement, and it was abstract in the sense that it's very hard for a company that sells razors to be able to solve the problem of gender equality, and it was met with backlash for those 2 reasons. The followers. This is something where you can actually do something as a business, but it's a pretty artificial, generic purpose that you are trying to actually action. MasterCard fell into this trap with a recent campaign in which they promised to feed 1,000 hungry children if a soccer player scored a goal in a leading world sporting global soccer tournament. The inevitable backlash was the reasonable question from customers of surely we should be feeding hungry children regardless of whether millionaire soccer players score goals. So in this respect, whilst they were trying to do something, they were called up for being effectively artificial. And this is a really key point, that if you're going to wade into the waters of brand purpose, you need to make sure that you're doing so in a very authentic way, because customers have a BS detector, which is generally pretty spot on. Then you have the dreamers. These are people who do have a sincere, authentic purpose, but it's very, very hard to action. Avery Dennison's mission statement, again, a proxy for purpose in this instance, was, and I'll quote to get this right, to help make every brand more inspiring and the world more intelligent. Keep in mind that Avery Dennison makes adhesives. It's very difficult to make the world more intelligent when you're in the glue business, but nonetheless, an inspiring notion. The best position to be in, we think, is the champions, actionable and authentic. Novo Nordisk, the pharmaceutical company, was a great example that Jay on our panel brought to our attention. And they had a really conscious decision to reframe how they thought about their purpose. Something which was very product-led initially, in effect, sell more insulin, to something which was very customer-led. And that was to a purpose of solving the problem or curing the disease of diabetes. What this did is it took a purpose which was quite reactive, as in looking at the symptoms of that particular disease and trying to mitigate them, and looking to take a proactive stance, which actually looked at the underlying cause and solving that. And this had the effect of galvanizing both their partner network as well as their employees. And we think really that's where you need to have your head at, as purpose as a tool to motivate your people. So what's the so what as we go into the panel conversation? Well, we think the debate around here has been incredibly polarized. On one side, you have the Simon Sineks of this world who will say that purpose is everything. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. We would politely tell Simon probably that I don't really care why Colgate made my toothbrush, but that's by the by. A true brand, on the other side of the spectrum, you have Mark Ritson and the purpose skeptics who are saying that a true brand purpose is fundamentally incompatible with the profit mechanism. We think that both of these approaches ignore the shades of grey in this debate. We think instead you need to find that middle ground. And that middle ground is to be an egotistical utilitarian. Now, for all those Matthew McConaughey fans out there, I've just finished reading Matthew McConaughey's book, Green Lights. It's excellent, highly recommend it. One of his chapters is being an egotistical utilitarian. He basically said the best moments in his career is when he managed to marry what was best for him, what was best for the greatest number of people. We think the same thing applies around purpose. If you can find a way to marry your purpose as an organisation with the ability to satisfy shareholders, we think you're doing very well. At the same time, talk is cheap, and this is much easier said than done. That's why we're having this conversation today. So without further ado, I'll hand back to Garai to start the conversation.
Thank you, Will. I almost got caught on mute there, but didn't quite. Anyway, we're going to kick off with some questions for each of our panelists. We have received a number of questions from our audience in advance, and we'll try to answer as many as we can within the next 45 minutes or so. But if you do have a burning question, please do ask it, as I said earlier, in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and I'll try and make time for it. I can't promise we will, because we do have a lot to cover. So let's start with, as Will put it, sort of the issues with purpose. And I'm going to start with a particularly big and possibly quite mean question. So I'm going to come to Jay on this one. Jay, what's wrong with corporate purpose?
Yes, thanks for the question. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm still trying to get my head around this idea of egotistical utilitarian. I like that. It's the first time I'd heard that phrase. Well, there's a lot of places I could go with this question of yours about what's wrong with corporate purpose. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that, for most companies, purpose is either an aspirational statement of values or it's a description of services. It's really rarely actionable at a business unit level, maybe what we could call a meaningful challenge, solving the problem of another. Purpose is also typically misaligned with the incentive system of the company because the internal management accounts, the P&L, is typically purely financial in nature, rather than including the impact business has with its business activities on communities, so-called social capital, on individuals, on their well-being, which we could call human capital, and on the environment, natural capital. And I've really yet to find a purpose statement, and I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of them, that says to maximize shareholder returns. That's really what the business model of financial capitalism is there to deliver, not the purpose. And this really can create a misalignment between management behavior in a corporation and their ability to actually deliver what the company says their purpose is. I actually believe that purpose is about, it's something that needs to be executed as strategy, not simply used as a tool, for example, for corporate reputation benefits. Because if it's all about reputation and not about strategy, purpose really becomes hollow. Some would call this greenwashing typically. I actually have another term for it, what I would call the purpose Ponzi scheme that I know you and I have talked about offline. Purpose Ponzi scheme is something when a company really sets such a lofty purpose for its reputation that it knows it can't achieve and doesn't really have the means to achieve it. And when they're called out eventually, they create an even loftier purpose that it also can't achieve, and so on and so forth. And this really has to stop, because all Ponzi schemes, as we know, including this one, will eventually collapse, and it'll have the opposite effect it was intended to have.
I think that's a fascinating perspective. I mean, a purpose as Ponzi scheme, it's just such a rich topic area. Richard, I mean, at risk of kind of throwing you a bit of a hospital pass, is purpose therefore in a commercial organization, in an insurance or a financial services business, is it just a big distraction?
So I'm a big fan of purpose, so I'm clearly going to won't be there to support it. And I think agree with the comments that were made in Will's initial presentation. I think it's a very positive thing for businesses to be doing. But the whole point is it's about how you execute it. It's not a distraction if you actually get all the right plans and your approach to deliver it in a commercial way, then suddenly it comes together beautifully. But you shouldn't pretend that just because you've written the thing and it's sitting there in a book staring you in the face, that somehow you've got the answer and it's all going to work. That's really your starting point. Is it part of a broader set of customer strategy work? Are you very clear on who your customers are? Do you know what's going to make you different and better that's linked to your purpose? Have you got a set of marketing plans that can turn this purpose into something tangible and they'll have a commercial benefit? Are there customer experiences that will differentiate you and make you have give your customers sort of more memorable experience with you that are linked to that purpose? So very much see it as the tip of the iceberg, rather than necessarily the cure to all evils, if that makes sense. So use it. It's one part of a bigger jigsaw. And I think if you can do that, then it's not a distraction. It is if it doesn't have anything to do with all those other things I mentioned.
Yeah.
If it's sitting there in the cupboard and it's not linked to your business plans, your marketing strategy and communication, and you can't work out how to do it, then something's wrong, and you probably need to think again.
I remember, it must be nearly 10 years ago now, I walked into and I'm not going to name them, but it was a financial institution in the City of London, and they had very proudly plastered their purpose all over the doors, all over the lift doors, on posters around the entire business. And I overheard a conversation in the lift. And in that conversation in the lift, the person said something along the lines of, I really don't know how this relates to my job in payment accounts, because nobody's talked me through how this statement relates to what I do day to day. And I can't see how it does. And I think that's been the big change, actually, as we've seen it over the last even 5 years, is that more and more people have started to realize that they can't just plaster messaging around their business, even from an internal perspective, because if they do that, it will fall flat, and it will fall flat with the people who have to live it day to day. And I loved Jay's point about folding it into your management tools and into the way in which you remunerate and reward your teams, because again, it's about behavioral reinforcement with teams. And if they don't feel they know exactly how to use it, then they won't use it at all. Which brings me to the next part, which is this question about communications, Louise. This question about, if it's not just a tool for comms, should it be used as a tool for comms at all?
I don't think there's an easy answer to say should it or shouldn't it, because I think it depends on so many different factors, and it depends chiefly on the organisation, on the maturity of the organisation, what it wants to achieve, and how committed it is to live that purpose, because it can be a massive opportunity to build trust and relationships with your customers, or actually, as you said, it can be a bit of a lightning rod for criticism. So if you're not prepared as an organisation to have it woven into the fabric of everything you do and everything you say and how you do it, then I don't think you should use it in your communications. But also, should you be out there? As Santander, we don't actually publicise what our purpose is, but it lives and breathes in everything that we do. And it actually is inherent in all of our communications, because it's such a simple thing that we're doing, but we don't go out there and plaster it on posters. But what we do say is we're here to help all of our customers, whether they be businesses or individuals. And that's the way that we bring that to life. But it cannot be tokenistic. And I think you see lots and lots of organisations that think, I'll use purpose in my comms and I'll use it as a sticking plaster and it'll hide a number of evils, and you get found out. So if you use it in your communications, you have to be damn sure that you're doing it for the right reasons and that you can live it in everything that you do.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the truth. I think that sort of sticking plaster kind of approach is, I think, what triggered the FCA so dramatically at the beginning of this year. This sense that brands were hiding behind taglines rather than actually really thinking this through, and businesses weren't really embedding these thoughts and perspectives on how they wanted to run their business in their businesses. Will, brand consultants like to invent things for people to spend money on. And, you could argue that purpose has been invented as a thing for people to spend money on. And I think my question to you as the brand consultant in the room is, what's the difference between purpose and brand strategy, or is it a part of brand strategy, and where does it fit?
I'm day 4 of being a brand strategist, so I feel like I can kind of, weasel out of that. I'll have a crack. I think they need to be aligned. Again, if your brand strategy is your promise to your customer, though, and your customer experience is your delivery of that promise, I'd extend on what Louise said, and I think you need to think very carefully as to whether you fold your purpose into that promise to your customer. My personal view, I don't really think that your purpose should be an external facing tool. I think it leads to a lot of booby traps. Number one, it encourages the type of overreach that Jay mentioned, the kind of lofty visionary goals that aren't actually actionable. I think that you set yourself up for failure if you make mistakes. If you find yourself in a position where you can't action your purpose, you're seen as a hypocrite, and everyone hates a hypocrite. You know, the one that comes to mind recently was Uber, the campaign where they said if you don't like Uber, if you are racist, don't download Uber. And this is a company which has developed a poor reputation for treating migrant drivers very, very poorly, and there was a huge backlash for that. So if there's any kind of way that a consumer can see that you're not delivering on that, then you're in real trouble. So I think that purpose for me is an internal tool fundamentally to guide your strategic thinking. I think it's an internal tool to help shape your culture. As a component of your brand strategy, 9 times out of 10, I would say that it doesn't have a place there. But I know that that is a contentious comment.
So does anyone on the panel disagree with Will's perspective there? This is a sort of a bit of a free hit for anyone who's interested in saying something a little bit different to that. Are we all in agreement?
I mean, we're talking a lot about marketing and branding here. I think there's a pretty big element, which is which Louise touched on earlier, is actually what customers actually get. I mean, what's the what it can do to to support your customers, to do a good thing for them, to make their lives better in some way. And I think it can play a pretty big role there, to be honest. It's I think us seeing it is, I think you almost put yourself in a bit of a hole if you come at it from a branding and communication perspective. I think that's the wrong starting point. I think you need to come at it from a, what's your North Star for your, your customers overall. I mean, I don't think that's disagreeing with what Will said, but it's just, it plays a pretty big role there. What is it that makes your experience better, more differentiated than anybody else's? I think it can play a pretty big role there as well. There's a bit of a trap for most businesses, because most are not startups like WeWork and have just come out of a sort of very fast growth, which can be almost built bottom up. Most businesses, of course, have been here for yonks and yonks and are trying to work out where to and how to evolve. And then again, starting internally, getting it right, actually doing the right things on the ground for your customers, and then talking about it perhaps at some point in the future, I think is also a pretty valid approach. Live it,
work it, and then maybe talk about it.
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. I'm going to come back to you, Jay. I mean, you must talk to people who are grappling with this sort of thing all the time at EOM. I mean, what is it that you see as the biggest problem? Is it that people start in the wrong place? Do they start with communications rather than starting with strategy? Is that what you see most?
Well, I mean, I think it's in the wrong hands in most corporations. I mean, I think it's really the strategy arm of the company that needs to be looking at how you align your purpose, what you say you actually believe in. What is the problem that you want to solve of someone else, and the incentive system that you build into your business model to actually deliver that. And I think there's been quite a lot of research out there that shows that companies that actually can align their purpose and the behavior of managers through the incentive system to deliver that purpose, those are the companies that are more resilient, but actually are more profitable for longer.
Have you got an example?
In that space specifically? Well, I think I probably would just refer back to something Will put in his diagram as sort of the best case, which was something that you and I talked about previously as well, which was the Novo Nordisk situation. I mean, I think this is worth revisiting a little bit in answer to your question, because Novo Nordisk is one of the clearest examples of a company that took kind of like a rudimentary, typical sort of descriptive approach to their purpose. Basically, we're going to sell more insulin, which didn't make them distinctive whatsoever in terms of the space and their competition. And their stakeholders didn't look at them any differently than just another company that was trying to sell insulin and make money off of treating the symptoms of a disease. And when they really had this kind of radical change of thinking, they repurposed themselves to say, as Will pointed out on his chart, to solve diabetes or to change diabetes. And this radically changed not only the management behavior, but also it changed the perception of the firm among all of its key stakeholders, who suddenly saw them as differentiated and we're working alongside them in this war against diabetes, even though it was counterintuitive, because if you're a company that actually sells diabetes medicine and you cure diabetes, then you could potentially be out of business. Instead, we saw just massive increase in the performance of Novo Nordisk after it repurposed itself. So it was actually doing the right thing, and how it treated others was more important than what it could reap from that activity. So if you don't chase the money in this business, actually it chases you, I think, is the lesson there.
That's really nice. And I think I'll come to you now, Emma. I imagine in that case, in a place where you can see something as powerful as the Novo Nordisk purpose in place, it has an impact on recruitment, and it has an impact on the strategy for the companies that you're working with. I mean, does it really map into sort of decision making around talent mapping? Does it map into decision making about how people go out to recruit? And does it limit people in terms of the people they're able to recruit if they're not front and center about their purpose in that process?
Yeah, I think certainly the businesses that are getting it right are being honest with their potential employees about where they're at on that journey, where their North Star is, but perhaps still need the time and resources to make it happen. We naturally expect to discuss diversity and inclusion, the gender pay gap, and our sort of overarching search methodology with clients. But purpose is becoming that increasingly hot topic because businesses look to engage people and also, as Richard mentioned, then derive that commercial benefit from it in role. I think for us, the most notable step change is that it's being driven by the board, namely CEOs now, whereas previously it came from sort of passion projects from middle management, but essentially the demand is being led by shareholders, and then it's group marketing and comms teams who are tasked with defining and executing it. We're working with one of the largest European private equity firms at the moment. They want to recruit a brand director, and their exco really wants this individual to help define their mission statement and drive purpose above profit in their role, having been predominantly known as a business fully focused on profits previously. You can see the same in asset management and insurance, that social growth as well as economic profit is becoming really important. So it's still a nice to have skill set to have that understanding of purpose. It's not essential, but it's certainly increasing on hiring managers' agendas.
It's an interesting one because there is a risk with this that it becomes a bit of a badging exercise in order to tick boxes. Richard, I'm going to come back to you and ask you something a little bit related, which is, what are the triggers that drive a business to look at creating a new purpose or revisiting their existing purpose and revitalizing it? Now, how do you know you need to do this work?
That's a great question. I think the right answer is where a business was really looking at its business model in the broader sense, rather than just us or a group from a marketing perspective looking at changing their marketing strategy. That, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it's got to come from, as Jay and Emma mentioned, it should be triggered by a sense across the business that something has to change, and there's proper buy-in to it from the CEO or the senior leadership. And many of the decisions that need to be taken are ones that are actually affecting measurement, as Jay mentioned, or the culture and how people work together, or teams who have P&L decisions that are going to need to make changes to the proposition. And I think if you've got that mix in the business, then you're ticking a lot of the boxes. Of course, there are more, but the sense is it's a business problem, not a marketing problem, if that makes sense. Now, it doesn't mean as the marketer or as the customer officer, you can't champion it or drive it or drive that change, be the change agent in your business, of course. But it's going to be a hell of a lot trickier.
It's an interesting place because, we published a study in January called From Chaos to Clarity, which studied, I think, 700 chief executives, CMOs, and senior marketers around the world. And we asked them questions about how they fundamentally how they manage chaos, how they deal with the impact of big shaping forces hitting their businesses from outside and from inside, and the extent to which chief executives have become more trusting and more demanding of their marketing function in driving strategic change. And what was really fascinating for us was that actually, I think the data showed that I think marketing or CMO or chief customer officer style roles were now the second most important role around the boardroom table, according to chief executives. And that's just behind chief financial officers. And that's definitely changed as a result of the pandemic, because I think what is increasingly true is that marketing speaks the language, or marketing and communications role speak the language, not just of marketing, communications and brand and everything that's related to that core role, but they increasingly speak the role of data. They increasingly speak the role of customer. They increasingly speak the role of insight, of technology, of finance, of all of the elements that if you go on an MBA course, you're supposed to get. And so increasingly CEOs are turning to their marketers, their senior marketing leaders, as the people to drive that strategy through the business, because they have the levers to pull. I mean, Jay, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm also going to come to you, Louise, on this. This idea that, you know, strategy should drive purpose through the business, I totally buy into. But does the chief strategy officer really have the levers to make it really sing in the business, to really make it real, or does it have to be more of a partnership? What's your perspective, Jay?
Well, it needs to be a partnership, and it's not just the chief strategy officer. I mean, this is really about providing tools of, it's providing new forms of measurement of non-financial forms of value, for example, what we call social, human, and natural capital, that companies create and destroy with every business activity that they undertake. And yet you only manage what you measure in business. And so if you're only managing and measuring one form of capital, financial capital, you're actually squandering a great deal of value. So the chief strategy officer needs to be able to comprehend all of this, but you need to be able to equip the line managers in business units, really those that need to execute this all the way through the business, with several things. One is with the understanding that every business activity has around it, assembled around it, a business ecosystem of stakeholders, right? And unfortunately, the way businesses tend to operate is they put themselves and their maximizing of their profit at the center of that ecosystem. And so the relationship with all of their stakeholders is very transactional, and it's almost like spokes on a wheel, and it's about extracting value from them rather than sort of co-creating value with them. When you put purpose at the center, it's kind of a radical change of thinking. It's almost akin to Nicholas Copernicus, you know, back in the 15th century, the astronomer who realized that actually if you put the sun at the center of the universe rather than the earth, then suddenly all the mathematics make sense. Well, if you put purpose at the center, then suddenly you've got the right lens through which you can identify the right stakeholders that you can assemble around this sense of shared purpose to help you deliver that. Okay, so you need to actually work hand in hand with the leaders of these business units in helping them craft a purpose, but putting it at the center, using that as a lens to identify who the key stakeholders are, and then actually spending time with those key stakeholders to determine what are they suffering from, what are their pain points, you know, what are the obstacles that they're encountering that's inhibiting their ability to perform at the highest level in delivering their part of the shared purpose. And so this is all purpose-driven delivery of managerial tools and techniques that mobilize multiple forms of capital, identify the right stakeholders, identify what the problems are that need solving, and then craft interventions with the business to help solve the most important problems. And what you get at the end of the day is you get a much more highly performant business ecosystem that's delivering that purpose. And you're going to see a superior form of holistic value creation that's also financial in nature, even in the short term.
I mean, it's a beautiful dream. I mean, Louise, communications has a huge role to play, especially internally, in making that dream a reality. But I also recognize ginormous multi-thousand person businesses making that vision that Jay rightly states as being a really, really strong kind of North Star for anyone kind of approaching this sort of project. It must be really challenging. Where do you start? And you know, how does a communications professional really help bring that vision to life?
So I think one of the key things with purpose as well is it's not just a static concept, is it? So that's the key thing about this. It's dynamic, it's fluid, it needs to be fed and watered to be able to be alive and live in an organisation. So I think we can provide a role where we're facilitating some of that and guiding and supporting, but it has to be driven very much from the top of the organisation, as Jay says. But I think the bit that's often missing as well is how you're working with your employees. You know, for us, we've got 24,000 employees. They are on the front line. They are seeing if the purpose is working. They are seeing if the purpose isn't working. They're seeing where you need to refine that purpose. So you need to set up also that virtuous circle of feedback to get them involved in living and breathing this. And I think that's the bit where often organisations fail, and there's certainly communications functions as well, where it's very much about delivering top-down messaging and slogans and posters, but what you're not doing is you're not involving them in how you're living it, and you're certainly not listening to them, and you're making assumptions and not actually thinking they are the people that can inform a lot of what you do. So I think, you know, where to start is always really difficult, but listening to people, involving your stakeholders, as Jay says, really listening at what's going on, not just in terms of the challenges, but what are the opportunities out there? And there are, we call it moments that matter. So where are there the moments that matter where you can really live that purpose and you can really demonstrate the value to your customers? And sometimes that is around, you know, in your sweet spot of what you're there to deliver. And sometimes it's around stepping away from that and saying, what do we need to do above and beyond that, given the external circumstances, to really support, you know, our customers in everything that they're doing and the lives that they're living at the moment.
I think that's a really good answer, because it takes us back into this increasingly rich territory of customer experience and employee experience and the interaction between those two areas. I mean, I'll talk to you, Richard, about this. I'll talk to you as well, Will, just to warn you before I finish this little thought. But I'm really conscious of the fact that as we have gone through the last 18 months as a business, as Clear MC Saatchi, the number of requests and briefs coming in from our client base that include the need to really bottom out how you roll strategy down through the customer experience and the interaction, therefore, that employees have to have with that on a day-to-day basis has mushroomed. Because I think increasingly people have recognized that you can't have one without the other, and you can't be authentic and deliver change unless your entire employee base recognizes how to make small changes in their day-to-day impact to impact on the customer at the end of the end of the kind of process. Richard, you've done a lot of work on this at Zurich. How have you, as a chief customer officer, tried to make sure that it's those small, almost sort of marginal gains that you're making day to day that add up to a larger whole in terms of delivering on your purpose and your perspective on the world?
No, it is a great question, and a very important one as well. We've got something like 55,000 employees globally, and there's no way that you can be able to realize this change if if you're looking at a business that, you know, has traditionally, or as many businesses have been traditionally focused financially. As Jay mentioned, how do you make that flip from the financial focus onto a purpose-led or customer-led one? Building capability has got to be a big part of it. It's, yes, there's a great need to engage, but you're actually fundamentally trying to get 55,000 people to do something different every day. So how are you going to do that? It's not just a question of motivating them to do it. You've also got to equip them to do it. You've got to, we talked about measures, and when we changed our STIP, which is our sort of short-term incentives, to have a blend of customer and financial ones, that obviously is electric. Everyone's paying a lot of attention. But again, then everyone's asking a similar question. Well, what can I do differently? How can I get involved in this? What sort of things can I do to make a difference? So you've got to you've also got to equip them and inspire them to do to be able to work in a different way. Again, no straightforward answer. We defined a set of skills in my team which were very different to how perhaps we'd worked in the past. So we're really an internal service provider. As a customer office, we're providing thinking about marketing and customer and digital and CX, etc. But within the broader business, a big customer capability program, to be honest, and a lot of work put into that, a lot of effort put into it on everything from the small things of how do you come into work with a customer-based mindset, and you've got to do that in a really inspiring way. Great speakers, great inputs, different practical case studies, running programs where you're taking business problems and solving them with the groups, where you're upskilling them with these new ideas and then getting them to fix real challenges that the business had. There's no one answer, but certainly capability is a big point. I suppose I'll just end with one very practical example. We flipped every role in the UK to be available as part-time or full-time and available to work flexi. And that was because we felt that we were, like so much of financial services, too male, too white, says me as a white male guy with no hair. And getting that diversity of thought into the company was important. And that's had a massive impact, actually, in terms of not just the applications, but successful people in applying to roles at Zurich and applying for promotions. Has had a massive impact. Oh God, it's something like a 40% increase in women hired into senior roles and women into management roles across the business, just offering every role flexibly. So sometimes I think, and that's, I'm not trying to belittle that because that's not a small change, it's a big old change. But sometimes it's those things that really crystallize this sort of purpose from being something abstract to your earlier point, and something that's bloody concrete is making a big difference on how the business is really working, and something that actually people feel really proud about. So it's then I suppose there's the final bit would just be about celebrating where, like, things like that where you see that they are working and things practically speaking are actually changing. Then to make obviously a bit of a song and dance about it, and for everyone to feel good about it, because actually it's a nice moment, and that hopefully stops that lift discussion that you saw where people are going, well, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. It's just what it says on the lift. That's a good example of where actually something really, really big and good has happened.
I'm desperate to say does what it says on the lift now to listen to the Ron Seal conversation. Right. Anyway, Will, I'm going to come to you because I think that sounds fantastic. It also sounds expensive. And if I'm a CFO on this conversation, I'm sitting there thinking, God almighty, they want more money. My question to you as a former customer experience lead for a FTSE 250 bank, there is a temptation to focus in CX on efficiency and on getting to the best answer fastest. How practically in your previous role were you able to sort of bring purpose into play to sort of do those marginal gains benefits and not just increase efficiency, but increase the enjoyment and the potential value to the end customer? Yeah,
it's a good question. I think Richard's hit on a lot of those ways in which you operationalize your purpose downstream. And I think they're all bang on. The one point I would make just prior to that though is the actual design of the purpose itself, which costs nothing. If your purpose is rubbish, no amount of capabilities or routines or rituals are going to get people to buy into it. It's as simple as that. So you need to make sure that above and beyond what we've said about authenticity, there are a couple of things I would keep in mind. Like, number one, your purpose has to be realistic. If you manufacture pencils, you're not going to solve world hunger. Don't pretend like you are. And that's the kind of thing when you have this purpose overreach, all of your employees will roll their eyes and you get disconnected. And, whether or not you have your incentive scheme aligned with purpose, it doesn't matter because they don't intrinsically feel it. And the second thing is I think it has to be lasting. Whereas strategy, I think, should be iterative. Your purpose is enduring. It's not necessarily suggesting that there shouldn't be at times moments where you look at it and you think. The Novo Nordisk example is a great example of where they have done that successfully. Generally, your purpose should be something which is the light on the hill, which is quite enduring. Only after that you've actually got that design of your purpose right, and it is something which is realistic, which is authentic, which is lasting, can you then think about those sorts of marginal gains. And I don't have much more to add on that to your question than what Richard put forward, because it's all those little things that he mentioned, which are critical in making sure that, the term I use is you operationalize your purpose, and then you kind of deliver it across all of the elements of the customer journey.
So Jay, we have had a question live from one of the audience members, which is one of my favorite questions I think we've ever had on one of these panels, which is fundamentally, once purpose is centered, can anyone speak to a few examples of specific metrics beyond traditional profit and engagement figures that an organization can track in order to assess the efficacy of a purpose-centered strategy? Now, I'm terrified that this is from an actual CFO, although given that they don't specifically talk about just profit, that might not be the case.
No, I think it's a great question, and it's also one that helps us open the door to getting off this trade-off kind of belief that you have to trade profit to do good for people and planet in your business model. I think the metrics that we kind of use in this approach that we call the economics of mutuality is we're expanding the definition of performance for the firm beyond simple financial capital to include other forms of capital that are non-financial in nature, but that companies have shied away from because they think it may be too complex to measure, or there's just not a lot of focus on the metrics. And previously, maybe there wasn't a scarcity of these forms of capital like there was in financial capital 50 years ago. So these are kind of the building blocks, social, human, and natural capital that we really use. And we actually can sometimes substitute these non-financial forms of capital for the KPIs, the key performance indicators that are the incentives that managers have to deliver against to get their full bonuses. So, we started a business in East Africa when we first started to experiment with this work, and it was really remarkable how we were able to change some of this thinking. Let me just explain briefly what social and human capital are. So just very at a top level, social capital is really about three variables that can account together for about 80% of any social capital space. We've done extensive experimental work in this area, so we know this to be the case in any market situation. And it's really about trust at a community level, social cohesiveness, and the capacity to work collectively. And this is a very significant form of value that is available to a business. But if you don't know how to measure it, you don't know how to manage it and mobilize it. Similarly, human capital is really, it's more about a standardized methodology that can determine through data collection and analysis what the true drivers of well-being are in any sort of corporate culture. And this also is very significant in terms of value, because if you can identify what your workforce really cares about, then you suddenly have the knowledge of what sort of interventions that you might want to take at an HR level to kind of grow people's confidence and their well-being in this space. And in the kind of world we live in today, people are very purpose-driven, especially people talk a lot about the millennial workforce. And I can tell you, these people think that they can get paid pretty much whatever they're getting paid now anywhere they go. And so there's a high competition for them. And how are you going to motivate them? You're going to do that through purpose. So when you start to understand what the human capital is, what the true drivers of well-being are, you can start to grow that human capital along the things that matter to that workforce. At Mars, for example, where I worked for 14 years before moving outside with this economics and mutuality organization, really the number one driver of well-being across that company was, in all of its business units, was do managers walk the talk of the values that they espouse? We did some work in this area and found that actually that equates to about a 30% pay raise that you might not have to give if you can satisfy somebody in that regard. And then last, on the natural capital side, businesses tend to focus on one metric in that space, which is GHG, greenhouse gas emissions. And that's fine and good, except that's an external benchmarking and reporting metric. It's not necessarily something that will give insights to managers and tools and techniques for them to drive to more resource efficient outcomes, which, by the way, have a smaller footprint. So to make a long story short, when you start to apply human, social, and natural capital, and we discovered in our business application of these different forms of capital in many different business activities, that there's a correlation between the non-financial forms of value and how much there are in a business activity, and how much economic performance expressed as financial value release. So this is the keystone lesson to walk away from with this, that you don't have to trade profit to do good for people and planet. In actual effect, if you can account for and grow and mobilize through your business activities, your business practices, human, social, and natural capital, you are going to see a big benefit on your bottom line. And if you are damaging these forms of capital in your form of business, you're also going to see a drag on your bottom line, but you're not going to be able to see where it's coming from because it's not part of your financial P&L. So I hope
super answer. Super answer. Thank you. Emma, I'm going to come to you next because I want to talk about that human capital piece. Actually, I want to talk about the best ways, or the reality, I guess, the reality check of the market right now. Does it have an impact on candidates, this stuff? Is it as important as Jay would hope it is and is becoming, or is it just the sort of the same old metrics, having a good boss, flexible working arrangements and everything else that's more highly important to that human capital that we're talking about? I mean, I think part of the challenge that I see is that, I don't know about you, but I see an enormous number of polls these days on LinkedIn, which have fantastically binary questions, which mean that nobody gets any real value out of them. Anyway, that's just me moaning. But in those questions, what we tend to see is, would you prefer having a great boss or working from home? And you think, well, I quite like both. Now, where in your estimation, Emma, is this going? I mean, that need to sort of satisfy that human capital with more than just a good pay packet, is it becoming more and more important in attracting really top talent?
It absolutely does have a significant impact. It's certainly not the sole factor, but Jay rightly mentioned employee well-being, which was a huge priority. And I think last year, when the world was put on pause momentarily, it was a really powerful time of reflection and reevaluation for individuals about their roles, who they work for, and what they want to achieve. And that provided a moment for businesses that treated their staff well, that got their employee engagement and communications internally right. They were the ultimate winners. But the reason the market is so busy this year and candidates have choice of their next role is because a lot of businesses did indeed get that wrong. So I think that purpose has an important place. People want to work for organizations where they feel good about promoting it in their day jobs, and they feel that they can get on board with something beyond policies and intentions. They want to see that actual evidence that businesses are contributing to society. But it isn't the sole factor. Flexible working remains a very high priority on job seekers' agendas because it gives a reflection of the company's attitude as a whole to modern ways of working. And I think there's also a new generation of leaders who are coming through and want to see that purpose is fundamental in what they do, that isn't necessarily advertised as something extra. It's actually fundamentally ingrained into the business's offering and culture day to day.
It's funny, isn't it? These things are all symbiotic. You've got this need for real purpose that actually, if you're in a business with real purpose that sort of delivers it and lives it in the day-to-day actions, you're likely to see a business that is more enlightened in terms of its approach to the way in which it manages its human capital, into the way that it manages its social capital, into the way that it manages its environmental capital. So there's a real kind of as I said, symbiosis in this. Louise, I'm going to come to you, I think, with the last question, which I'm going to take from both Jervis and I'm just going to say Jervis. I'm sorry, Jervis, I can't try your second name. I've had no sleep. And Brooke in our quick question panel. Both of them asking a pretty similar question, which is, if your purpose isn't something you want to use externally, does that just mean that you can't present it and that you've got the wrong purpose? And actually, if you never say it externally, does it also mean that your customers won't be inspired by it in the first place and won't really know what you stand for?
So we don't hide it, we just don't make it a strapline. So I think that's the difference. So if you look at any of our documentation, if you look at our annual report, if you look at speeches that our senior execs give, it's mentioned throughout there, but it's not something that we'd go out and necessarily have that plastered over posters, because what we try and do is live and breathe it and bring it to life in ways that engage people. So it's not something, I've read the questions, it's not something we're hiding, it's not something we're embarrassed by, it's not that it's wrong. It's just in terms of the way that we choose to bring it to life and the creative ways that we do that to engage in different areas that we believe make a difference to our customers, rather than spending lots and lots of money on a grand advertising campaign. What we decide to do is say, okay, we're going to bring it to life through a anti-fraud campaign that really will impact our customers and help protect them. So we don't hide it, we're not embarrassed by it, but would you see it on a billboard? No, because that's not the way that we choose to use it, but it's out there, we live and breathe it, and we talk about it all the time. And actually, as you say, it's a guiding light for us. In every meeting that we have, we go back to that, and every decision we make, we go back to that. We just don't choose to use it as a strapline.
I think that's a lovely answer. I mean, Will, I'm going to come to you for a final thought on that point. Is this actually about making sure that your purpose is embedded in your customer experience and from there out?
Short answer is yes. I think Louise's answer was absolutely spot on. I think that's the way I would think about purpose as well. As long as you're not thinking about customer experience as customer communications, I think that is absolutely right. But conscious we're short of time, so I think that's a nice way of framing it.
Thank you very much. So to summarize, a brilliant panel. I think let's learn from Novo Nordisk, cut the nonsense, focus on shared value that really matters to your key stakeholders internally and externally, and that reflects your real role in society. And then make it authentic and back it up with real management action, investment in your staff and the behaviors you want them to represent, and consistent internal messaging. I want to say a huge thank you to TML Partners, our fantastic partner in putting this event together, to the wonderful panel, Louise Shield, Richard Pash, Jay Jakub, and Will Kingston. And again, thank you to our audience who have fantastic questions and made this a really interesting conversation. Please tune back in for the next Clear conversation on the next consumer behavioral shift on the 29th of June. That will be another really interesting one, focusing on how brands that have made a little bit more money during the pandemic by being in the house managed to maintain that investment in their brands as we all leave the house for final time. Anyway, enjoy the rest of your evenings and afternoons, and we'll see you again on the next one. Thank you very much and goodbye.